Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to start by presenting the minutes from the December meeting and asking if there are any amendments, edits, and if not, asking for a motion for approval.
So moved.
We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very quickly, two items that I just kind of wanted to brief the board on, brief those in attendance, those watching. One, a very brief update regarding our waiver under No Child Left Behind, our waiver request. We did make the initial application within the deadline for the first round of states who will be requesting consideration for a waiver. There were 11 such states. We have received our first wave of feedback from the peer review team that was put together by the U.S. Department of Ed. We are in the process of very quickly, and I'll define very quickly, by the end of this week, responding to that feedback, and then we will engage again with department staff next week. In speaking with the secretary and speaking with the assistant secretary, Carmel Martin, our intent is to quickly turn this process around and get an approved waiver. So I have asked the department, the U.S. Department of Ed, to be as responsive as quickly as they can, and I have directed our department to be as aggressive and as responsive as quickly as we can so we can get this turned around. I would also add that this has been defined since day one as an iterative process. Unlike Race to the Top, this is not a yes or no, win, do not win initiative. Their intent, the department's intent, was to start with peer review. And again, the peer review teams were very different from Race to the Top because there was no financial consideration. So you didn't have a lot of this conflicting out that we had to deal with during Race to the Top. So we put our application, our waiver request in front of the peer review team. They gave us their feedback. They then turned the entire process over to the department. So any peer review input from this point in time will strictly be kind of a consulting basis to the department. From this point forward, we're dealing with the United States Department of Education staff, not peer reviewers. And that has provided some challenge because, again, there is a little bit of a disconnect between maybe what peer reviewers were looking at and what the department is looking for and some of the guidance that was given to peer reviewers. So we are working through that. We are, again, probably in the first wave of states doing our responses to the peer review process. Those will all be submitted again to the U.S. Department of Ed by Wes? Friday? The 6th. And we intend to have a follow-up phone conversation next week so that we can, again, move this forward, get our waiver approved, and move on. So that's kind of an update. If there are any questions about that, we have a few folks who have been involved in this process who can also help answer questions. But if you have any questions or comments, this would be a good time to fire them out.
I appreciate, by doing this, just understand that Tony is asking for waivers to get us away from the AYP situation. And I appreciate that the 4-star status has just come out, and we've recognized some excellent schools. But please understand that there were enough excellent schools not recognized because if they were in the top 25% of all the categories, which is 4-star school, but did not meet a system that doesn't work with AYP, they were not recognized as 4-star. So that's another one of those things that's coming out. So a lot of recognition of 4-star schools, but there were some very good schools that should have been recognized that weren't because of the AYP system that is not right.
And again, this just grossly oversimplified. What this allows us to do is have one accountability system.
Yes.
And it really allows us to utilize the new measurements regarding growth as part of that. And our application, our waiver request does include a strong focus on narrowing the achievement gap by viewing the lowest 25% versus the upper 75%, or possibly even maybe, depending on public input, looking at even the upper 25% in some capacity. So Mike's exactly right. This will eliminate that AYP designation under subgroups. So I would say to you that just in very simple terms, many states are pursuing this lower 25%, upper 75% arrangement. I would say that's a pretty strong characteristic of first wave states. Wouldn't you, Wes? Wes has been involved in this. And truthfully, that's a place where the feds are looking, because they have to be able to show that that measurement is a dynamic measurement that focuses on closing achievement gaps. And so that's where a lot of this discussion is occurring. Would also share that we receive very positive feedback in every area regarding our teacher principal effectiveness stuff. It is a very strong component of our waiver request. So very, very proud of that. I'm proud of the work our staff is doing around this, because this is as Mike mentioned, this is a kind of a front burner issue. The other thing we're looking at is, how do we provide incentives to outstanding schools and school corporations? You know, so much is always made of accountability in terms of, let's identify the lowest 5%, let's take action on our lowest performing schools. Well, you know, as Mike mentioned, we have some folks who do outstanding work, and how do we give them more flexibility, more incentive? You know, how do we give them recognition that is more than, in my opinion, a pat on the back, but really reward the leadership for moving their schools to that level? So that's another consideration in this process as we move forward. The other thing is a very quick legislative update. I think, as everyone is aware, the session starts today, and I'll leave the comment to that. The session starts today. It should be an eventful session. There are really three big areas I think you will hear coming out of the House and Senate Education Committees. There probably will be a number of smaller, I don't want to use smaller, probably lower profile bills, but there will be three that you'll hear about. One is a discussion around multiple count dates. This was actually brought forward in the number of town halls we did during last legislative session regarding money-foggling children and what happens to public schools when they receive students back from either charter schools or voucher schools. So there was I would say, a very strong voice of support throughout the state when we had these discussions last year. The General Assembly heard those voices and are now taking the next step to move to multiple count dates. So that is a very positive move in terms of, in my opinion, marrying fiscal policy and ed policy, because this really moves us to another level of money-foggling children. Also, the online course requirement, that will be a discussion in both chambers. Again, we've had folks from Ivy Tech step forward and say, how can they help with this? How can they help? Because there's been a huge amount of discussion among superintendents about the cost. Ivy Tech may be able to do this at very little or no cost to districts across the state. So it's a very positive, I think, move to move our kids to the 21st century. And finally, the whole issue, and this does go back to the waiver discussion about our accountability. And again, expediting the timeline, but more than expediting punitive action. It is expediting the opportunity for schools and school districts to proactively intervene during the process, so that it's not, we don't get to the end of the line and the state walks in and says, this is what needs to happen. Our intent is to build a progressive system where districts can hopefully have whatever they need to solve their own issues before state intervention does occur. So I think you'll be hearing a lot about school accountability and about accountability in general. You'll hear a lot about online course requirements, and you'll hear quite a bit about multiple count dates. So those are the three big areas, and I would again say that those will probably be overshadowed by other legislative initiatives. Joe?
The Ivy Tech online course, will we work to push the dual crediting, since that seems to be
I see John Newby back here, and John and Jeff Terp have been involved a great deal in this discussion. That's actually, Joe, what they're talking about.
Okay, good.
Marrying the two.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Any other board member comments, reports?
I'm just going to make a few comments. Number one, as schools end the fiscal calendar, December 31st, start their new fiscal calendar, here's a compliment to what has happened since Governor Daniels has been in office. Number one, we have received our money from the state in a timely fashion. And that was not always the case, because you know that, like some government things, it makes you nervous, huh? Like some government things, they were holding that money to balance their own budgets and then making local school districts go out and borrow money. So as I'm preparing a budget this year, in the past, in debt service, I've always put in $100,000 to pay interest on and I'm a small district of a general fund of about $6.5 million. But I was going out in debt service raising $100,000 for tax anticipation warrants, because I was not getting my tax dollars in a timely manner and I needed to have cash flow. Well, the last couple of years, because of that move, I haven't had to go out and get $100,000 in tax anticipation warrants and tax my publics. So just know that that's a compliment to what has happened. Not saying that, don't misunderstand that I think that tax caps are good for local governments and everything else, but that transfer of the money coming from the state has eliminated my need to go out and raise dollars in tax anticipation warrants. So I wanted to say that. And then I'll end with this. I have not received a certified budget yet, and we've started the new school year, and I do not have a certified budget in my CPF. I do not have a certified budget in my transportation. I do not have a certified budget in bus replacement, and I'm not sure what my general fund dollars are officially. And this is January, and we haven't got any of those. And I'm not sure if that's an issue of the Department of Local Government Finance or where that's coming from. Joe and I were, I had one more thing here, and I appreciate Tony's comment. We were talking about this on early graduation, and like I said, again, I'm a small high school, but at the same time, 10% of my kids graduated at semester this year. You know, and I'll just say that 10% of my kids graduated semester this year. I'm not in favor of second count, because just like Tony and I will agree on, I'm not going to riff teachers second semester and to lose 10 kids like that. And I wanted to pull out one kid. One of the young men who graduated is a young man named Taylor Ish. He was one of our better wrestlers, defeated one of our foes, Belmont, in a local meet the other night, and he's headed to the Marines on January 9th. So that's what he was ready to go. So I appreciate that opportunity. I don't want to be penalized for kids hustling and graduating at semester. And Tony agrees with that, and I appreciate that. Joe and I, and I need your direction here. Joe and I participated in a webinar on the PARC assessments, which are the Common Core of the states, and I tried to chat with Joe that day. She wouldn't respond to me. I don't know what the deal was, but I was getting snubbed. Anyhow, that is coming down, and I'm not sure what the responsibility of our board is to become more aware in the consequences of that. The only thing I would say is, and I get these things, there is a national conference on college and career readiness and Common Core state standards in Chicago, June 28th to 30th. I don't know if you want the board represented there, if Wes is going to represent us. I'm not positive, so I don't know where you want to go with that. And then, Joe, I don't know if you have any comments on the park assessment.
No, it's helpful, very helpful. And it gave me a little angst about the need to push forward with our local corporations, and they're still kind of leaning on the state standard.
Sure.
But it was a good overview.
And again, this is Wes is very, very involved. I think yesterday we released, it was for Park, and again, I can only speak for Park because that's the assessment consortium that we participate in. But we actually released our first intent to negotiate regarding item design, right, Wes? And that's a pretty big milestone to hit. So
What does that mean?
Well, Joe, the easiest way for me to describe it is this begins the true test development.
Okay, that makes sense. I thought when you were saying item design, I was still living over here, that the corporations are living in state standard land.
No, this is, Wes, is that, you want to?
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. The Park Assessment or the Assessment Consortium are charged with building essentially the next generation of tests. And part of that is to design tests that aren't just paper tests that have been moved to a digital format, which is the position that we're in. I mean, we're delivering tests online, but they are tests that were built from the ground up to be delivered paper. So this is trying to look at item types that may not exist at all currently on tests because of the limitations of using paper. It may be some item types that exist but can work in a much better way. So if you think about matching items or the idea of drag and drop in terms of answering, it's not an item type that's really revolutionary. We've had a couple of smaller contracts with research universities to develop some what we call innovative items that we're trying out or that will be tried out this semester in very small pilots. But this ITN that Tony referenced is the core item development ITN. This is to develop about 20,000 test items for the Park Consortium. It's a huge number of test items over a 2-year period that will provide all of the items that will be used in the park assessments as in the 14-15 year when we initially implement, but also plenty of items to have for at least 2 more years worth of tests after that, so that we've got a nice pool. There certainly will be. I want to make sure, while we're trying to take advantage and make sure that we're taking advantage of technology, there are still going to be plenty of multiple choice items. This isn't all about whiz-bang. Multiple choice items are very efficient for certain things, but the idea of having items that are simulations or content that isn't all written. Much of what we access these days and students access is spoken or video, and on a current paper test we don't deliver prompts that way. So that's some of the idea behind some of the innovative item types. Again, we're trying those out. That work will be finishing up with these early grants to the University of Pittsburgh for ELA items, University of Texas for math items, right about the time we anticipate signing the procurement for the item pool, so that some of the items, so that development will also be guided by that. But to your earlier point, the focus right now for schools needs to be on the Common Core standards and making the move to the Common Core standards. The test is being built, and as soon as there are example items, sample tasks, we'll make those available. But this test and all the items are going to align to the Common Core standards, not to the Indiana standards. And that's where we're trying to make sure that folks are focusing in the next year to 2 years, is making that transition into the Common Core standards so that we're preparing students to take this test that we're building.
That helps. As I listened to that, as I listened to the webinar, number one, I think that Indiana, we've done a nice job of moving forward, and I think we've created a nice test. You know, whenever you create anything that large, and you involve states we're in different places, you know what you're going to come to a medium point. So I'm not yet convinced that our test is going to get better. That's because, you know what, when you have that much and you're mixing it all together, you're getting a blend, and I'm not sure that things are going to get better. I think they're going to be very similar, and I really believe that some of the things they talked about, we were kind of, through Wes's help, we kind of set a standard for. And you know, then of course we got into the test, the cost thing, and it says presently, and I don't know what we pay per student right now, Wes, but $17.74 a content area, $17.74. And presently it said the average was about $14.50 per test, and they thought that if they kept the test, they could keep the test around. By doing this thing, they'd get it down to about $10.50 per test.
Right.
And they said performance test, if human scoring, it would be about $11.40, and if they were able to make it all machine scoring, it would even drop that cost to $9 a test. Because right now we're spending approximately $30 million on testing.
Right.
$30 million on testing, and so if we could drop that number, and if we're paying $17, and if we can get it down to $10, that's a savings.
Yep.
And so.
Appreciate the comments. There certainly will be some pressure from some states to kind of go to the middle. There are some of us who are working hard to try to make sure that doesn't happen. And Tony's one of those. But there are several states who have tests that currently have open-ended items. I mean, part of that, when they talked about that average, that's across the 25 states, and there are at least a third of the states that their tests are completely multiple choice. They don't have any open-ended items at all, and you're talking about this PARCC assessment having a very significant part, items that are go well beyond what we do. The most visible piece is our writing prompt, but it's kind of a raw writing prompt. We ask students to write, and if they write well, they get a high score. But under the Common Core, it's going to be about evaluating the accuracy of the sources that the students use to write. It's evaluating the content that they write about and the content of their answers, not just can they write well. So that part will still be evaluated, but you're also talking about taking a step beyond what we do with writing, which is evaluating the actual content and the sources that are used inside it. So you are correct. When you're in a consortium, there's certainly pressure from all sides. We're kind of in some ways in a bucket with Massachusetts and New York, some states who have got performance items where that's a place that we're very strong about the role that those need to play. But there are other states for whom that's a huge lift in terms of policy and change at a local level in terms of their assessment.
And am I thinking that the first group of tests would be in 2015?
The 14-15 school year means
Right.
that will be the testing will take place in
Spring of 15.
late winter for the performance-based items, and then in May for the machine scorable piece.
Because I think people are looking at that timeline, and I think 2015 is about what they're suggesting. So again, my summary in this, I don't know how you want Tony, and I think, you guys can talk about how do you want the board involved in that, and I don't know if this thing in Chicago is a sales pitch or if it's actually something we need to be at. Are you aware of that?
And
Let me hand it to you. And
I'll
then-
give you, okay. I'll get back to you.
That's fine. And like I said, if it's worthy, okay, and if it's not worthy, I respect that too. David, you're right.
I guess this is a question for you and the whole team. It is beyond unlikely that those people that have the intent to respond to needs and opportunities that create jobs, that hire people, are going to say, oh gosh, I'll hire Mike because he passed the park test, or he passed the consortium test, or he passed the national average test. I'm going to hire Mike if he's got the stuff that I need to be hired. And so I know I don't have to say this, but I think we ought to make sure the board is of a common mind that we need to aim to the high end, to the rigor end, to the end that meets the needs of employers, and not compromise. And if that means getting in a little trouble, you're good at that. Let's get in some trouble.
Well, I think, again, trying to put a lot of things together, our accountability standards around college and career readiness indicators indicates that we are going to shoot at a rigorous level. But I think there's another piece of this that we didn't talk about and that Wes and I were involved in just before Christmas when we met with our park states, is the role of higher ed in this discussion. Because, this is a big leap at the secondary level. And how do we get buy-in around the secondary assessments from higher ed is a whole nother discussion. And frankly, that's a discussion that is probably, Mike, even a more difficult discussion among 26 states than what the items look like right now. Is how do you move higher ed in each of these 26 states to engage and buy into this whole process. So to that end, David, I think we have to stay on track to really push high rigor. I think it's a matter of credibility. I think it's a matter of credibility with our higher ed community. I think it's a matter of credibility with our career readiness, our economic development opportunities. So we will be pushing for more rigor and staying at the high rigor end of this thing.
Can I ask a question I should have asked when you were giving your brief legislative report? There's been stuff in the paper and some of the newsletters about, the miraculous $322 million that were discovered hidden in the mattress. And there's some discussion about how that money might likely to be used, whether the automatic taxpayer refund will be triggered or whether the legislature wants to try to spend it. Do you envision DOE being pulled into any of those discussions? I've seen one proposal where there'd be some funding for pre-K programs, and my concern would be one-time money for to fund ongoing initiatives always makes me nervous. So I'm just wondering if you could.
I have been, and I gave the same feedback you just gave, that this is one-time money, and I think it will really be vital that however the money is, however the General Assembly or the Governor's office decides to utilize that money, it is obviously going to be an issue where I think you're not only looking at what that money will fund, but what that stream of money behind that money can sustain. And that's kind of been my discussion, Neil, is how do we make sure that whatever we do, whatever is done with that money, if it is spent in any way possible, is let's consider that we have to talk about sustainability, and we have to understand that in its purest form, this is one-time money. Not a whole lot different than Mike and I have dealt with at the corporation level when people have asked us about cash balance. Because we all know that the minute you spend a cash balance, it's gone. It's not a sustainable form of revenue. So your comment is dead on, and when I have been asked, that's been the caution I have raised.
Tony, is that what is happening when we see headlines saying, you know, that gross amounts of millions are being cut. Is it the issue that they received the, what was the money called?
The stimulus money?
Yeah, and they incorporated that as part of their budget, and now they're justifying, okay, we don't have $4 million, so we've got to riff. I mean, is that?
Well, I think in
is that a
some
true
instances,
statement?
I would say that, again, this goes the entire spectrum, as Mike knows. You had superintendents that saw that stimulus money, the ARRA money, as one-time money, and they spent it accordingly. There were folks that maybe, who did one-time type of stipends or those types of things with that money. I'm not going to say that was universal. I think we took every possible caution to make sure we threw up the warning flag that utilizing this in any way other than one-time money would create a huge structural deficit. And I think what you're talking about in some instances you could see that.
Will that be eventually identified when it comes to the department with those budgets? I mean, will it be easily
I think it can
defined?
be easily identified. I also think along these lines, there's a lot of discussion about corporations who have, for various purposes, either local property tax issues or general fund issues. How do we talk about this distressed unit, distressed school corporation issue, which is, Joe, the immediate.
Yeah. The debt limitation?
Well,
The debt?
yeah, it's not only that, but we have some folks that are just in truly difficult financial positions. There's no secret here. I mean, we can talk just to the east of the city at Mount Vernon in Hancock County is a district that there's been a great deal of publicity about the financial situation there, and what the General Assembly may have to consider regarding maybe is there the need to revitalize that distressed unit appeals board and what we would do around that, because that is a direct result of what you're talking about.
Right.
And I appreciate what I think Joe has a good question. A few years ago, when it came out that we had the shortfall, and they told us in December that you were going to lose 3% of your general fund, in reality, it was more like 4.5% of your general fund. So I want to get that there. But we did get stimulus money. So then it came down to philosophically, what do you want to do with stimulus money? Well, there was a lot of unemployment, so do you want to keep some people employed? And so the answer is yes, some school corporations use that stimulus money to keep people employed during this recession. Now the stimulus money is gone, and so maybe it was after that 4.5% was cut, where maybe you were going to have to RIF, where the stimulus dollars didn't make you RIF immediately as deep.
Right.
The cliff this year.
Right.
And so, and that 3.5% has not come back,
Right.
and the stimulus money is gone. So yes, there may be continued reduction in force,
Right.
or maybe a delayed reduction in force,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Again, it's really intriguing because each school there are 292 school corporations, and they're all as different in their handling of this as night and day. Yep.
One other area that is absolutely compelling that we get some more capital into the game on is the CTE effort that is going on. I have had two people in my area down there who own personnel agencies who have come to me and asked, what is the state doing to try to beef these skill levels up? And strangely enough, they didn't come collectively, they came singly. And the main point that they made is where the real skill gaps are really starting to hurt so much, and I've known for years intuitively this is how this is going to happen, is at the middle skill levels. And so that's where all of these years of putting the dropouts on the trash heap, and we haven't fixed that problem, not by a long shot lately. So I don't think we can, in good conscience, neglect not giving that a shot of stimulus as we go forward.
And Jim, that's a great point. I think the next, we took some, and I know board was very pleased with the work done in CTE and the pathways and the clusters last month. But the next two big pieces of that is, one, funding,
Yeah.
and two, in our accountability system, we're talking about college and career readiness indicators, one of which would be certifications, state, national, industry-based certifications that are, in many instances, those middle skill jobs.
Exactly.
And I think we have to then now take a look at the next phase of that is, what are the certifications that should be recognized in those pathways? Because I think all of us know that there are probably some certifications out there that are not of high rigor and are not very relevant to kids truly being employable. So I think the next thing we need to start thinking about as a board is, as we look at our school accountability framework, and we're going to reward, and I think Neil was the one who said, let's start at a low-level percentage of how much those fit into the equation. And part of it is because of the integrity and the fidelity of the rigor of those certifications. And now I think our next piece is to say, let's make sure that the kids who are leaving our CTE experience or our comprehensive high schools with national, state, or industry-based certifications are leaving with a true employability certification. And I think, Jim, so when you combine funding in that, I think that's when we're really going to make a huge difference in this. And that's going to be very quickly coming to you.
Tony, I'm listening to this discussion, and there's appears to be $300 million out there, and the behavior will be to spend it. And we've been asked and given consultation to people who are talking about that. Do we want to, will timing work? Would it be appropriate for us to make a drive, maybe make an investment here and put together a coherent argument that if you want to stimulate job growth and attract industry, that we've just invested serious money in skill of our workers? Extending unemployment's fine, but the money's in and spent, nothing changed. This would change something. It would change the human capital available for the further development of creating wealth and quality of life and helping families actually take care of themselves. So I don't know if the timing works, but do we want to make a concerted effort and make a proposal about an investment on pathways and legitimate certifications? It isn't too hard to make the case. It wouldn't be an enormous thing, but do we want to beat the drum on that and lead on it as to wait and see what's going to happen?
I think that's
You've got plenty on your plate, but
Yeah.
as
I
a
think
board,
that-
do we want to make an investment? And this seems to be strategic and long-term, make a difference for individuals, state, quality of life, economic development, help families.
And I'd also like to, again, just to open up, in that question, Dan, open up this discussion, because when we also talk about long-term, if we go right back to when Wes was sitting right there talking about assessments, we're also talking about the delivery of these assessments being technologically driven.
Yeah.
And we also know that across our state, we have varying degrees of connectivity, of capacity in this area. We also have a discussion about online courses. So, that discussion has also come to the department from other sources saying, if you're going to make a recommendation, maybe a recommendation should be some type of technology recommendation, because that is a true one-time expenditure of funds. In terms of, technology grants, what have you. So I don't know, I just want to throw that out there that, if we're going to do if that is going to be a discussion, I think we ought to at least have a full range or a menu of considerations.
Yeah, expending money and getting the one-time pop is very different than strategic investment. And there's and I haven't looked, I know our efforts, leadership is so critical, and it seems to be a general belief now and understanding you have to put a lot of authority in that principal.
Mm-hmm.
And let the principal run that school and take responsibility for it, but also give them authority to run their budget, hire their people. The human capital available for leadership in this state needs attention. Development of our present leaders and new leaders, that would be a strategic investment. I know our efforts, we'd sure like more resource behind that. It's a terrifically big payoff, and it pays off for years. So with all the needs, we're central to the future in education here, and this board and our strategy, what we're doing. And there's some strategic investments within our realm that would be a very welcome recipient of some investment like that. And we could get a return, not for a year or even months or 2 years, but it could change a whole different development. And if we could suggest 2 or 3 things with some force and consistency, we might be quite a service to the state. And it would be good use of funds.
When was the last time the schools received the formal technology funds? Do you recall?
I'm not sure. Joe, I can
5,
check. Yeah,
10?
it's been a while.
I was just curious.
I've been visiting some of the CTE programs and career centers in my area, and I have been just pleasantly surprised at the facilities. A lot of them have just state-of-the-art equipment. What's been sort of discouraging is the fact that the halls are empty. I mean, not literally empty, but far less students than you would expect given the outlay and capital expenditures, the kind of equipment, training facilities they have. I've had, in some of the discussions with the administrators and teachers that run those programs, I was dismayed to hear them say that one of their biggest hurdles is presented by the counselors and administrators of the high schools, who feel as though they don't want any of their academically tracked students to take CTE, to do cooperative education. And I think that's just absolutely a mistake. And I'm really pleased that we have increased the percentage, the weight percentage of the accountability metric to actually give them some credit for the number of students that go through those types of programs. I mean, I don't know what the thinking is now, but when I was growing up, my grandfather was a pretty much career principal, and he always had the policy that you need to be able to do academics, but you should learn to do something with your hands also. And I think that's something that we do well to get back to. So is that just unique to my area, I guess I'm asking, or is there sort of this stigma out there about CTE, career and college preparation?
Well, I could answer that as a former CTE director. There are a number of tensions on the CTE experience. Tension number one was really created by the fact that historically, and I'm talking, let's go back 15, 20 years, 30 years, CTE was the place for non-academic track children. That's where your students who were not going to go to college and were going to build houses, were going to work on cars, and you know what? Those were in many ways viewed as the kids who didn't learn very well at the high school. Now that's going back, and in many ways, CTE has not yet outlived that stigma. So that's a problem. That's a tension we have on the system. The other tension we have on the system is one that I hope that SEA 1 and 575 helped us eliminate, and that's the tension on the system of the competition for students in CTE programs versus the competition in the system at the comprehensive high school, especially if they're separate institutions. You know, having run a CTE center that was separate from high schools that served 11 districts and 27 high schools, I had to go out and say to students, how do you want to spend your junior and senior year electives? And and many of your CTE directors will tell you that becomes, if you will, that turf war about keeping enrollment at the school so teachers remain employed at the school versus sending the students to the Career and Technical Education Center. Because if as a counselor or a principal you recommend that a student pursue CTE, at least in the setting I was in, that meant they spent half their day at my center. And they lost half a day elective time at their comprehensive high school. And if you sent enough of those students to our center, what would happen to the teachers who were teaching the elective courses that those students no longer chose to take? So there are two tensions. The tension number one is how we have viewed CTE in the past, which goes to Jim's point that we can't view it that way anymore. But two, CTE must become part of the discussion that we have to make the decisions around what's best for the kid, which goes to why we wanted to provide an incentive for that in accountability, because it is important. If we're going to drive an economy with students that have these skills, we should be recognizing schools for providing that. But I'll tell you, it was difficult work every year driving enrollments at career and technical education centers when you were going into high schools and basically saying to students, do you want to take auto technology for half the day and leave here and work in a very high end? Because again, if you get a certification in some of these auto tech programs, you're going to walk into some dealerships making some pretty darn good money. Do you want to spend your elective time with that, or do you want to spend your elective time in these areas? And the only way we could keep our enrollment up was when we actually sent our teachers and our administration to the schools to explain why this was valuable to students. So Tony, it's not just specific to your region. I would tell you every person who runs a CTE program in the state deals with these two tensions.
But schools also get credits for the number of AP classes they offer. Schools also get credits for the number of honors diploma kids that they graduate. Schools also get credits for those. And so those alone are saying, if you're going to be an honors diploma kid, you can't do that.
And from what I was hearing, it can be just as basic as the way the scheduling's done, where it almost makes it impossible.
So there's some conflicting incentives out there. You need more AP classes. You need more academic dual credit type of things. You need more kids getting honors diplomas, because we're going to pay you for every kid that gets an honors diploma. So there's all these conflicts out there.
I'm glad the comment stimulated the discussion we just had, because it's certainly high time that we have it and then get in gear. So I'd like to throw out just one other observation from just the recent past. Dan and Eric Redelman both have been two of the leaders of the Chamber's development of a new strategic plan for the coming years. And then there were an awful lot of deliberations where you brought the high-powered CEOs of our companies around the state together for I guess about 11 months.
It was an exhaustive process.
For a half a day. Yeah. And the most common theme that seemed to run through that is how critical fixing our human capital issues really, really is. Correct?
I was struck with the capital that's available nationally, internationally, and even in the state, if they could rely on well-educated, well-trained individuals on a consistent basis to run the shop. Because you put millions to billions of dollars into an enterprise, and you just got to have the supply of people. And we're talking about people that were pretty sophisticated, sincere. Some were academics, understand the whole system. It was an ongoing seminar as we did the plan, but you came out of there with a clear insight that your human capital investments, and to be strategic about that and excellent, was our way to the future. We can't guarantee in an international competitive market, I can't guarantee anybody a good wage. Skill level and intelligence, character, commitment, follow through, honesty, wasn't all just academic or skill. It was if you have a reliable source coming at the enterprise, they feel like they can do something valuable for the world and get paid for it, and everybody can benefit. So, yeah, it was very, very clear that there's a lot of important things to do, but the human capital thing rises to the top. And
well, that was living proof as a final comment, and then I'll shut up about this. But you all know what my passion is and how serious this is to all of us. His business has an absolutely enormous stake in fixing this thing too. So I don't think it's at all out of place to ask them to help come to the table to help fix
Yeah. They're motivated.
Yeah.
And they're wise about what they actually need.
Right.
There's also the thing about the human cost. You really, you could start programs for now till eternity to give people things, but you can't fix the fundamental problem. The generative one is to help people that we've maybe set aside, made bad decisions when they're young, and now they're sitting there very dependent. They can't contribute enough to get paid a good wage, and if we could help get them in the game, it's a social game changer. So I've become a devotee of Jim's.
Okay.
He's got the message, I mean, down, and
we
if you
need
score it on all different dimensions, social, family, economic, this is the way forward.
You know, we have to convince our brethren.
Yeah, it's a hidden problem, because folks are they're out of the game, kind of, or underpaid. How do you get them up? How do you get folks up?
Well, again, if you want to go back to the whole discussion we were talking about earlier, when we had the park discussion, the only folks we talked about having at the table were colleges. It was higher ed. Now think about that. I mean, what message does that send when Mike talks about a conflicting message? We were talking about how do you get post-secondary or higher ed buy-in, and we limited it to colleges. And that, until you made that comment, and Tony, you made that comment, I hadn't even thought about that, Wes, that, that's a whole nother discussion that I think we have to have at Park. There is more to this than assessing whether children are prepared for college.
Because most companies now have their own application exams. I mean, Google's notorious for the one they give you. So, I mean, that's something they should absolutely be at the table.
It drives home really how important getting the certification mentality embedded in business and industry is, because you have this huge, almost 1 million people that are semi-literate in Indiana, which we continue to add to each year because we turn out more than we give GEDs to those who would pick up off the scrap heap. And after running manufacturing plants for as many years as I have, I recognize completely that you have a lot of people that never finish school, but they have an enormous amount of what I call street smarts that let them learn very quickly in that environment. So if we can finally kick away the mentality that you have to have some type of an associate's degree to hold job A, B, or C, that really if he can learn the critical skills that lets him do that job, life can go on and we can be successful. The education sector has pretty well kept that line of thought at bay for way, way too long.
Good discussion. Great discussion. Anything else? Well, thank you.
We have no one signed up for public comments, so we can go right into the discussion and the update on school interventions with Jim and Jackie and Matt. Do you have someone to run the PowerPoint for you?
Jackie.
Okay. If you do Shift B, it'll bring the PowerPoint up for Mass Insight. It's back here, Jackie. There it is.
Good morning, everyone. Just want to start with, at the last meeting, Dave, when we were talking, I think Vicki and Mike asked questions around, so how are we going to assess the success of the interstate interventions going forward? And Tony referenced a framework, or a framework that we use that grew out of an R&D education group out of Boston called Mass Insight. We've used this framework for a number of years in a variety of ways, and Dave encouraged me to revisit that as sort of a brief refresher today. And so in your notes, you have just a basic 9-slide overview to it. I'm not going to go through every slide verbatim, but I just want to hit on a few high points and kind of update you on how we used it in the past, how we see ourselves actually expanding our use of this framework going forward, and how that relates to state intervention work. And so just as a bit of a background, so I'll talk a little bit about a background of the framework, and then I'll talk about how it relates to the work ahead here. So Mass Insight, as I said, is an R&D entity focused on education with multiple strands. It has a STEM strand, and it also has a school turnaround strand called the School Turnaround Group. And in 2001, it started on a multi-year study of high-performing, high-poverty, what they called high-quality, high-poverty schools, and looking for what are the qualitative inputs that predict the quantitative outputs in terms of student test performance, credit accumulation, college matriculation, so on and so forth, in these schools. And at the end of this study, they wrote a report called the Turnaround Challenge, which Secretary Arne Duncan, at the time the head of Chicago Public Schools, referred to as the Bible of School Turnaround. From this report was created a framework known as the readiness model, which is the framework that we use in a variety of ways here in the Office of School Turnaround, and I'll show you a graphic of that on the next slide. The readiness model has 3 domains: learn, teach, and act. And then within each domain are 3 indicators. And I'll just stay on this slide for a few minutes and go through essentially what is highlighted for you on slides 4 through 7 in your notes. Readiness to learn focuses on 3 components. Safety, discipline, engagement essentially talks about the extent to which students are both inspired to learn and feel secure in their learning environment. Action against adversity, this focuses on those issues which the report calls poverty-driven challenges. To what extent does the school address those? And then close relationships between students and adults. And here we're talking about mentoring, particularly between students and teachers, and the positive nature of those relationships. The next domain focuses on readiness to teach. Jackie, if you could go back for me, sorry. I'm going to stay on that one for a moment. Thank you. The readiness to teach focuses on this shared responsibility for achievement. So here we're talking about, to what extent does this buy-in to the mission around achievement permeate throughout all levels of the staff? Next, personalization of instruction. So this is where we're looking for differentiation of instruction, the individualization of instruction based on student needs and student data. And then finally, a professional teaching culture. So to what extent do we see job-embedded professional development, which is meaningful, and collaboration? And then the last strand, or the last domain, is a readiness to act. And here we're really focusing on school leadership and district leadership. So first is a resource authority. To what extent do the folks on the ground in the school, particularly school leaders, have the authority to drive their decisions around human capital, time, money, programs, scheduling, everything to the local needs and the mission of the school? And to what extent, in the next area, are leaders able to secure additional resources and leverage relationships, as highlighted by resource ingenuity? And then finally, to what extent are they agile in the face of turbulence? So here we're talking about flexibility, inventiveness in response to a variety of challenges. So that's at a high level, a brief overview of the model. Jackie, if you wouldn't mind skipping ahead a few slides to slide 8. Keep going. Perfect. So we're one of many states which sort of read with great interest this report back in 2007 and have since followed closely Mass Insight's work. And we have taken this report, we have taken this rubric, and with the help of some outside entities, it has evolved into a more locally driven school, what we call our school quality review framework. And on the next slide, we talk a little bit about how we use this. And so back in August, when we had our conversations around potential state intervention in our 7 lowest performing schools that have been in academic probation for 6 consecutive years, we looked both at the quantitative information, we looked at student test score data, but we also looked at consecutive years of school quality reviews conducted by Department of Education or Cambridge Education, which was an outside vendor which was contracted to conduct evaluations a few years ago, that used this same framework. And this is important because it provides us with a common language around which to go beyond the numbers. in a way that looks at these qualitative inputs, which are often predictive of the quantitative outputs, which are also tracked. And so if you just stay right there. So going forward, we hope that this work will not only continue to inform our school quality reviews with our schools that are in years 4 and year 5 of Public Law 221 academic probation. We hope that it will continue. We know that it will continue to inform our work with state intervention recommendations with schools that hit year 6. But we're looking at multiple ways to expand and actually use this rubric in ways that backs all the way up to schools that are just entering into the Public Law 221 academic probation pipeline, if you will. So schools that are in years 1, 2, and 3. And some of that is deeply enrooted into our waiver. And I won't go into great depth, but in the future, as we move through the waiver review process with the U.S. Department of Education, I'm certain that we'll have an opportunity to describe to you the ways in which we actually, just like good teachers backwards plan, they know what the end goal is, they know how they'll assess their students, and they back that up to the very first lesson. We know that at year 6, we'll use this framework to evaluate schools. And so we do this in year 4, we do this in year 5, and we want to find more meaningful ways, not just around evaluation, but actually around the selection of interventions that schools that are in years 1, 2, and 3 of academic probation select in a way that is rooted to this framework, so we're all speaking a common language. And as Dr. Bennett mentioned in the last state board meeting, we also know that when our turnaround school operators take governance control of the schools in question starting in July 1 and during their operational years, we'll continue to use this framework as a way to evaluate those qualitative inputs, not only to provide that common language, but also to be sure that we aren't waiting for that first year of ISTEP or ECA data to come back before we meaningfully evaluate and track progress towards goals. And so I'll pause there and see if there's any questions about the framework as we've used in the past or as we might use it going forward.
Jim, have you been using this, has the department been using this rubric for the 221 schools
Yes, sir.
presently?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It has. So all schools that the first year of those quality reviews at year 4 under Public Law 221 were conducted using this framework or some version of it. We have taken that visual that you were shown earlier and created our own, and there's a hyperlink in the PowerPoint to that, which we can send electronically, or we can just send you the copy directly.
But the bottom line is basically performance on the test scores, right? I mean, you can do everything in the readiness model and have high scores for all this, but if the test scores are flat or decreasing, then you're failing, even though you're doing all of this, right?
Sure, that's true, but the purpose of using the rubric is actually to be able to provide meaningful, actionable feedback in those earlier years that in a way that will drive improvement in those test scores over time. And we do see a strong correlation, though, between, if we look at the quantitative outputs and you look at these qualitative inputs with the rubric, there is a strong correlation if you look at the schools particularly that hit year 6 this year. Some of the schools that were assigned lead partners, they actually showed measurable growth on this Mass Insight framework over their 2 years they were evaluated on, particularly in certain areas. With the assignment of the lead partner approach, was very much informed by the fact that on those the qualitative inputs, they were showing significant improvement in key areas.
Jim, how well documented is the attention and achievement of, I'm going back to your little holy trinity here, of improvement, but you have a common language.
Yes.
And I hear you saying that, well, let me go to my first question. If you improve these 9 aspects on the 3 part of your triangle, you say that correlates in achievement driving forward. How well documented is that?
It's not.
I'm not questioning you. I'm
No, it's
just
totally
wondering how to
fine.
use it.
Yeah, so I think it's documented primarily, Dan, more at an anecdotal level at this point,
Okay.
in terms of it's locally in Indiana, and we can certainly look more nationally at studies that have been done where this has been used and developed prior to Indiana's sort of adoption of it back in 09 and 10.
And then I'll ask you something that, it's probably just an impression, but if you took these 9 aspects based on your triangle achievement and I think you're talking about a common language, a framework to think about improving schools, any school, but highly impacted.
Sure.
With the forces that make it difficult. Boards, teachers, principals, everybody that's connected with these schools, how well are these terms used commonly, and how deep is the understanding? For instance, even this board, if you went, we've had some presentations related to this, but how well do we understand all these elements and the consequences of them?
Sure.
What's the depth of use of the language, and then knowledge around these? These all make sense to me as an educator, but
Sure.
what is the depth
Yep.
on the bench here of understanding of the plays and how to execute them?
I would say it's a great question. I would say that it is most pervasive at schools that are sort of in years 4, 5, or 6. So those that are heading towards the potential of state intervention or have arrived at that. And that's an artifact of the simple fact that we use that rubric to evaluate those schools at year 4 and year 5 when we go in to do the school quality review. And so as a concrete example of that, if you go into our only current year 5 school under Public Law 221, which is John Marshall Community High School, the first thing you will see, or one of the first things you will see when you walk in the main entrance, is a banner that runs from one side of the hallway to the other that says, "Are you ready to learn, teach, and act?" And there are billboards, both in teachers' lounge and in student and in hallways, that go deeper with that kind of language and the indicators. Now, what we're hoping to do through changes that are embedded in our waiver application is make that deeper and make that go earlier, affect schools that are earlier on in the pipeline by enabling schools to make selections for school improvement initiatives that are anchored into this framework, so that this goes beyond not just a billboard, but really permeates down into professional development, so on and so forth.
Well, you could write a book plus a ton of seminars in each of the 9
Absolutely.
topics, so it takes a lot of depth. So,
Yeah.
so the prospect, I mean, there's no saying, the prospect of a hanging concentrates one's attention. So the prospect of a school takeover, people want to go ahead and look at the framework and get serious about it.
That's right.
And at least anecdotally, you would see an association, a connection
Absolutely.
between focusing on this, learning about it, implementing it, and seeing the achievement start to drive.
Absolutely.
And growth.
Absolutely. Particularly with, when we conduct our year 4 and year 5 visits, the folks from districts come in with the rubric in hand. They know, because it's been consistently used since the inception of these quality reviews, they know that this, in addition to the quantitative outputs, as Tony mentioned, will be a huge factor in terms of, looking at, the status of the school and the corresponding reports.
Any other questions for Jim and his team?
So with that, I'm going to ask Matt to slide up. The other key area that was discussed at the last state board meeting as it pertains to school improvement and turnaround was pertaining to a letter that was addressed to Dr. Bennett from a group of concerned Manual alumnus. And from that letter, there was a request made on behalf of the board to have a follow-up conversation with Indianapolis Public Schools district officials regarding the areas of concern addressed in that letter. And that meeting has occurred, and I'll let Matt give you an update on that.
Sure. Good morning. Since we met last month, upon the board's recommendation, I reached out to Dr. White to schedule a meeting. That meeting did take place the Friday before Christmas, and had a very good discussion, very productive, and received assurances from Dr. White that at least alleviated our concern about possible IPS plans that they were planning on removing personal property from the building. Dr. White assured us that none of the property that's currently located or assigned to Manual will be removed, and that if they had any intention or desire to remove any property, they would first contact the Department of Education and let us know. So based on those representations, I'm preparing a letter to Dr. White and just confirming our meeting and the assurances he made at that meeting, and at least from my perspective, I think that takes care of that issue.
Any questions for Matt I also attended that meeting, and I'd say, Matt, the characterization of that meeting was Dave, you were also present, was a pretty open discussion. I think there are also some areas beyond the letter, the response, where the department's going to need to facilitate some discussions between among Charter Schools USA, probably to a different extent, Ed Power and IPS. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
So,
How about the issues around enrollment, encouraging, discouraging, messages about enrollment and driving enrollment?
well, Matt, you want to?
That's probably a gray area.
It is a gray area, Dan, and I think one of the things that in order to be consistent, I think there's the issue of Dr. White has clearly understands the competitive nature that
It's a marketplace now.
that it is a marketplace. Now, I think where we all stop short is I think teachers should be in the classroom teaching and spending their time teaching children to the standards and not recruiting kids. And that's the message I think we have to send. That I don't have a problem. Frankly, I think it's healthy for the students, and I think it's a clear indication of the success of the General Assembly and this board that the message is so crystal clear about the need for IPS to offer innovative options and high quality options to students. I think that's a direct reflection on what's been accomplished here. But I think what we have to be careful of is that we don't undermine the educational process for our children in trying to recruit. And I think that's the message we intend to make sure we send. Anything else?
So with that, I just want to provide a brief update on our progress with our turnaround school operators and our lead partners. With our turnaround school operators, we have deliverables for phases 1 and 2 currently under review. We plan to provide actionable feedback to our turnaround school operators by this Friday. If any modifications, subtractions, additions, anything along those lines need to be made to these deliverables, and we'll certainly make those deliverables public and work with our turnaround school operators to create dissemination plans for them. Just as to refresh your memory, the first deliverable pertains to the assessment of where the school is to date. And that assessment is done not just through data requests, but also through a variety of focus groups, surveys, community meetings, conversations, a whole gamut of input. And the second deliverable pertains to human capital in terms of the plan by which, through which our turnaround school operators will ensure that the most highly effective teachers and school leaders will be employed by the turnaround school operators in these schools for these students beginning next fall. And so those are under review. And with that, we enter into our third phase of the contract, which pertains to the evaluation of the school, soup to nuts, curriculum, extracurricular, the whole 9 yards. And this is a short time period, so this will be a very busy month. That deliverable ends at the end of this month. And based on the information from all 3 deliverables, the first 3 deliverables really leads into conversations around, well, we know where we are, and so now what? And so it leads into our 4th deliverable, which is the creation of that school turnaround plan. And I'll let Jackie say a little bit about, in addition to those deliverables, we've also recognized that community engagement and an update on that is really paramount, particularly through conversations such as this one. And I'll let Jackie talk about the reports that she has acquired from both our turnaround school operators and lead partners. Then I'll say a little bit about our lead partner work.
Well, good morning, everyone. And with that said, we ask all of our turnaround school operators and our lead partners to submit a report on their community engagement, which you have before you. So with your review, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Attendance wasn't real fair to me. Maybe it was stated and I missed it. I read through it last night. What kind of outpouring or what kind of connection to the community at different events or other ways you measure engagement? What's your sense, Jackie?
Well, it's been varied. When Dr. Bennett shows up, we get a room full of people.
They want to show their love and respect, don't they?
Right.
They're just like us.
Thanks, Dan. Very kind of you.
Unfortunately, it does vary. When it comes to parent meetings, sometimes the attendance is lackluster, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We would wish for a whole lot more people to show up. Charter Schools USA did do a expo, is what they called it, a couple of weeks ago. And the first meeting was a little slim. The second meeting was more widely attended. So it just varies. I think it depends on the evening, it depends on the parking, it depends on the weather. Unfortunately, these things are factors, but I think we get a lot more through maybe sometimes email and things like that. So it just, not as many people as we'd like, unfortunately. And they have tried real hard. I think some of them have worked very hard to
So
recruit
the effort's
people.
there, and we're going to have to work it. There's a relationship that may be broken. I mean, these schools didn't get in trouble by accident. Right.
And if I could add to that, Dan, I think that, so two real themes to build on that. One is persistence. And so, Charles Schools USA is an example. Go back to those expos. They've said on the bash that these are the first expos, but not the last ones. We know that we're going to have to do this many times to be able to reach the critical mass that we need. And I think the second thread is to be sure that you are bringing on board and in meaningful ways really key allies in terms of parent, family, community allies to help be your messengers. And I think that, again, just as an anecdote, the PTA president at Howe Community High School has been very active in this process. And representatives from Charter Schools USA have had many conversations and are really making some great strides in building that relationship, recognizing how critical it is, not only because of her role there, but also because she has a daughter in the school. And so I think that that's an example of the kind of work that needs to be done time and time again, and eventually I think we'll reach a tipping point. But it is
Long-term endeavor.
It is long-term, absolutely.
When the parents come, what do they ask? What is their perception?
I'm sorry, Joe, you said when the parents do attend, what is their perception? I think they're beginning to learn. The more that they learn about the turnaround school operators, the more comfortable they're becoming. I think there was a lot of fear out there at first about what's going to happen to my school, what's going to happen to my child. But the more that they are being contacted, the more conversations that are happening, I think people are becoming more comfortable with the turnaround school operators, are asking more questions, so they're learning and getting more information. I think things are getting better.
I think there's an article I think that really highlights, Joe, your Jackie's response to your question, Joe, and that's an article that's done by an affiliate or sort of a corollary of NPR called State Impact. And they did a piece. They attended both of the expos, and they did a bit of a piece about sort of what are students and families saying. And the student that they interviewed is a young man who's a freshman at Manual High School, and his mother was there. And the mother reported all of the misinformation she and her son had heard from various sources about what Charter Schools USA would be doing at the school next year in terms of not having any sports. I think the article talks about the school being on lockdown, so on and so forth. And I think what's promising is that the student at the end says that, upon meeting people and hearing that they're going to have X, Y, and Z and continue to offer A, B, and C, the student wants to stay. And I think that is really an example of what's both what parents are asking, what parents and students are hearing, and what it is incumbent upon our turnaround school operators to be able to combat directly.
Well, as I ask that because, as many of you know, parent involvement is a key passion of mine. And what I find that is lacking historically, and that includes the PTAs, is the parents don't have relationships. They don't understand the education process. They don't understand their students' rights or their rights. They are more so booster club folks. And I hope we can work to go the other way and blend the two a little better.
We agree.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd like to add, we don't want to keep all of our conversations to here in Indianapolis, up in Gary. With Gary Roosevelt, Edison Learning has scheduled a series of community meetings as well up in Northeast. So
at various different times, various different locations. And I think to Dan's point, I don't think that there is, and Jackie and I have said, well, what about this time? And I think it's just it's a try everything at least once, see what works, and then just revisit it and drive it.
Jim, you said that there's a third deliverable at the end of January.
Yes, Nick.
And that's going to drive the development essentially of the turnaround plan for the coming year.
Yes.
And how much time will it take to develop that plan? I'm wondering when the right time is to come in and provide a more substantive
Update.
briefing and input. I mean, I know that most of this has to be done by DOE staff, and I understand that, but we're on the hook
Yeah.
for this. I mean, it's the State Board of Education that has kind of taken over these schools. So I really think it's both a personal responsibility of mine and a collective responsibility of ours for really understand what is being proposed and what's going to be done. So maybe it's not when this third deliverable is done, maybe it's after the turnaround draft plans are developed, or maybe it's sometime in between, but it sounds like either in February or March. We have to set aside a block of time to really go through in some detail what's going to be proposed.
I agree.
Well, I want to go a step further than that even, because I'd like to see the two assessment
See
reports.
me and raise me, huh?
See you and raise you. I'd like to see the two assessment reports that they filed last week.
Sure.
that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah, we'll certainly, absolutely. It's not a problem at all.
Because part of the reason is the contract negotiations are ongoing. Is that right, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
So anything that we may see that we want to sort of interject into that negotiation process, we need to do it sooner than later.
No problem.
Is anyone from Edison here?
No, we
No,
haven't.
they're not here. Okay. I mean, you all should talk with them. They need to do a better job advertising.
We have.
They're just not hitting the mark. They had a community meeting December 20th. Me and a Post-Tribune reporter, the only people that showed up.
December 20th is a tough day.
Yeah, it's a tough day, but I mean, I found out with about 24 hours notice. And, they have a sort of a list of who they're contacting. I think part of it's in the packet here, not necessarily all the churches, but I mean, there's some glaring media presence that aren't here, and people that they otherwise probably should be talking to. You can't really just run an ad in the Post-Tribune and the Times and think you're going to reach Roosevelt parents.
We appreciate
Yeah.
that. In respect to clergy, we just had a very nicely attended clergy meeting in Gary, like 3 weeks ago. It was a great meeting. And then in regards to media, we just sent them an email with some recommendations from some of our parents in Gary with some people that they need to contact, and they're going to adopt that.
Community newspapers,
You know,
smaller market newspapers.
See, Jackie,
No.
you gotta let Tony, I mean, Tony he can't attend every meeting, but you have to let him know when you're planning a clergy meeting.
And they have
So he
started
can-
doing that now,
Okay.
because I think that what precipitated my request last
Yes.
time. But
Okay.
but just in terms of radio, I think, Jack, I may have sent you a couple
You
additions.
did, and I forwarded those to them, and any other recommendations
Okay.
you have, we'd be happy to send those to. As a matter of fact, they're eager to receive them.
Okay, good. And what was?
The larger point,
When you're having a party, they want people to come to their party, so that's fine. Yeah, we'd love that.
the larger point, this is a big move. This took courage and foresight to do it. It's very simple to know what we had to do in one way. It's very hard to pull it off, and we ought to know real carefully, make sure one another knows what's happening, and if anybody sees something, and is this, and there are some people associated with this whole move, emotionally or whatever motivates them, say certain things. So it's a double, triple effort, because some of the hearings that we had this summer, it appeared to me that the community had pretty much disassociated with the school. And there's kind of they just walked away. It was resigned, it didn't work very well, and so that's the environment, you gotta build it. Plus, there's some people that probably are saying things that are not exactly correct. So it would take a triple effort, and we need to know what's happening on there, and the plan, and how we're monitoring it, and anything that can be done to help advance it and make it go, because these are real children that are going to attend there, and we want to do best by them.
One of the surprise statements I heard from the Vice President of Edison is that they're going through an internal review process to even see if, after doing their assessment, they want to take on the project. And that was shocking, because I know that they're already in contract negotiations, but she was adamant that, no, we're going to look at the community and look at what we're dealing with, and still have to make an internal decision as to whether or not we want to go forward. I'm not sure if that's really going to be an issue, but Matt, when do you all anticipate having a final draft of the real operating contract?
Well, as you know, the final plan is going to be incorporated into the contract by reference to the scope of work for the subsequent years. But in terms of, at least I anticipate negotiating some of the boilerplate provisions, a lot of the things that some of the operators said wouldn't be an issue this year, but maybe an issue next year during operation. So I'm hoping to have a draft probably sometime in March, maybe late March.
Will it be possible for us to see a draft of the final draft prior to execution?
Absolutely.
All right.
Let me say just very quickly, Tony, I want to respond because I very much appreciate your comment regarding the Vice President of Edison. I had many detailed discussions back in August and September with Edison, and I think they are walking into this eyes wide open, and they understand our clear expectation is they're going to be operating this school for the next 4 years. I know that, I think that everybody's trying to leave themselves a little bit of room here, but, we made an investment to move forward. Edison has stepped forward, and speaking to all of their folks, I think they understand that this was not an assessment year for Edison to determine whether assessment was going to play or not in this process moving forward, and whether they were going to run this school for the next 4 years. I made it abundantly clear that it was my expectation.
So I just want to briefly, the other piece was sometimes gets lost in here, but I think it's just in many ways really powerful to see it evolving and progressing in the ways that it has. It was our work of our lead partners. Right before the holiday break, we were able to attend a meeting between Indianapolis Public Schools district leadership and leadership of Scholastic Achievement Partners. Essentially, it was an update meeting to say, we have kicked the tires, we've surveyed teachers, we've surveyed students, we've done some family surveys, we've had many planning meetings with district leadership to get that critical buy-in, because none of this works if it's top down. It has to be something where this doesn't seem like just another initiative that's coming in from the state. And during this meeting, the conversation was incredibly productive. Hard questions were asked. Is this the right tact? Is this the right intervention? Is this the right initiative? And a really genuinely productive conversation was had that ultimately ended in agreements, full agreement on the plan for the work. Requests made to the building leadership to make the appropriate modifications to student schedules so that they could be assigned the appropriate classes, and the appropriate interventions that Scholastic Achievement Partners is focusing on. And so that conversation is one that we will now have with our other two lead partners here in January and early mid-January to continue that and to be able to really tighten it up. I ultimately, just in terms of having attended, having team members attend planning meetings between teachers, district leaders, school leaders, and our lead partners, I'm just struck and really impressed and appreciative of the questions, the dialogue, but ultimately the high levels of buy-in and support that we're receiving really from top to bottom for this. As an example, at Broad Ripple, where Scholastic Achievement Partners and the new teacher project will be working, they've branded this initiative the Rockets, and so one of the teachers has branded this initiative Operation Rocket Ship?
Rocket Fire or Rocket Ship.
Rocket Ships. So in any ways, it's taken on a sort of a local colloquial term. Now, it may just be anecdotal there, but I think it speaks to the way in which this has, and this is vital, the way in which it has become not a top down, but rather this is something that's going to help us improve and that we're going to be a part of. And so I think that's critical to update you on as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Anything else? Lady, gentlemen.
Thank you.
A brief update on the public hearing, rules and public hearing. The A through F grading, the public hearing is scheduled for January 17th. As is always the case, board members may attend the meetings if you want. It is not required. In the past, there have been times that only the state board administrator has attended, and we have recorded and then provided very detailed notes of the public hearings. So if you do plan to attend, let Becky know so that we can make provisions for that. So that public hearing is scheduled for the 17th. Becky, we also will have the online opportunity opened up as well, right?
The online comment form has been operational since mid-December. I checked this morning, we've had 15 comments submitted. It will remain open until the end of the week of the public hearing. I've had one written letter from a superintendent commenting, so people are looking at it.
What's the time? What time?
10 o'clock on the 17th here in the Riley Room. And Dr. Bennett's correct, we will summarize all of the public comments we get, and whether or not, based on those comments, any changes to the proposed rule are recommended, and that will be one of the prime topics for the February meeting. And if I could, excuse me, Joe, the public hearing on the reading rule is coming up day after tomorrow as well. I don't know that we anticipate much on that, but to let you know, the public hearing is scheduled this week. Joe?
I just wanted to say I plan on being here. I think it's a critical issue and discussion and decision that we made aligned with our growth model and, you know, the waiver we're seeking from the federals, the feds. I want to also share, I've heard from many charter schools that are concerned about our benchmarks and that we're limiting it to I-STEP because there's not a pre and a post measurement, and I hope that was an issue I too had, that if we just, you know, a lot of schools have NWEA or NAEP or Scantron, and why can't we consider expanding those benchmarks for those schools if it shows growth? So I just wanted to bring that up again, and that I will be here the 17th. And I appreciate the opportunity.
1 p.m., huh?
10.
Sorry.
Let me just address that a little bit. One, the issue of NWEA, what have you, I think when we get into that discussion, we begin to open up accountability to kind of love is a many splendid thing. I mean, it can be a lot of, accountability becomes a lot of things to a lot of people then. And I am very concerned, and I am adamantly opposed, and I just want to say this, to any accountability system where all of our state schools who receive state monies have any differing accountability standards. I'm 100% against that.
Then how do we plan on identifying pre-assessment when there is a 3-year or 3-month lag learning time? That's the piece that it really concerns me. You know, we went to spring, and then we have 3 months lost education time. We're not going to year-round schools. And then there's another whole year, and then we have the assessment. If we're going growth, I'm just trying to work through this. If we're going growth, how do we know they've grown? Are we just leaning on that almost 2-year window or year and 3 months that was not really instructional time?
Sure, and I think
I'm sorry, you gotta.
It
doesn't make any
It's
sense.
1 year.
It's
You lose 3 months instructional time, and then you have 9 months of a lag time.
Right.
So are all of us really comfortable with that being our only benchmark for growth?
It's the only summative benchmark. It's not the
Understood.
only diagnostic benchmark.
So are we going to expand it to provide diagnostic provision?
well, I mean, our diagnostic tests are low-stakes tests. And I think that's been a concern all along. I mean, or I should say, no-stakes test in many instances. So I think, I'm...
Well, why, I don't understand why, I mean, maybe I'm just a simpleton, but it seems to me you measure growth by how you did 1 year and then how you did the next year. Now, whether it's beginning of the year or end of the year.
How long have we been doing that?
Yeah.
And where has it got us?
Well, the issue's not the assessment, the issue's,
Well, the assessment,
How it's
the whole
being taught.
benchmarking, the grading is really on top of the I-STEP piece.
I don't think the problem has been when the tests are taken or how the
No.
assessment's done. The problem's been the kind of, well, there's a lot of problems, but instruction and content and
Right.
standards, et cetera, that's the issue.
I agree with you there. I'm just saying it's,
Well, I'm totally with,
only-
we got to have one everybody's got to be held, everyone's got to use the same instrument.
I agree, but we've been doing that for many years and it hasn't changed the growth attitude.
Well, I don't think changing the test or making other tests available as benchmarks is the answer to that.
Let me address that, because I don't think we've ever really addressed growth until recently. I mean, we've
The last 18 months.
yeah, I mean, we've only, as a former school administrator, we've only addressed improvement, which as school administrators will tell you, affords us the opportunity to only focus on the bubble kids. And there is a difference between improvement and growth, especially if we use, the contexts that we've used in the past. So I think our look at growth and Wes, there are 23 states using some version of the Colorado growth model. I do think that gives us a much different look. I just want to respond to the concept of charter schools being concerned.
No, it's not just charters. Let me qualify that. Non-public schools too. I mean, they're getting a lot of the at-risk students, and now they've got a year to use the I-STEP to prove that they've got growth.
And I would say the same thing, because again, how do we differentiate that from a 6th grade public middle school that gets 5th grade students from an elementary school?
Right.
I think one of our current considerations is how do we treat new schools, all new schools, be they newly open schools and corporations, newly open charters, newly open privates. I do think we have some consideration around new schools, but because in many instances, they're getting a new population. But even then, you can have that same argument about that 5th grade to 6th grade in a public school corporation and their, the migration of students in. But be they, and no one's a bigger proponent for school choice than I am, but I think a foundation of school choice is a uniform system of accountability. And I think we're very fortunate here. And I want to say this, I think we're incredibly fortunate that Indiana is like, and I'll just ask John's expertise, if we're not the only state in the country, we're probably one of a select few where our private schools agree with what, John, the 90% plus level to utilize our state's assessment system. So we have a better ability to measure than anyone.
I'm not I'm not debating any of that. What I'm saying is we are going to see a lot of F schools next year. And those F schools, our goal was to educate the public. So that will tell a lot of people is these non-publics or these charters are failing. And doesn't define, okay, they're failing because they're bad schools or they got a flux of at-risk students or, that's my question.
And I guess I would say that what you just said regarding a high number of F schools, that is not what our data showed.
I know.
I mean, our data showed that really, especially at the high school level, we have statistically and comparatively a low percentage of DEF high schools compared to the rest of the country. And that would include our charter and voucher schools. And I think our new accountability rubric and metrics are in many instances preschool friendly because of some of the considerations we're using and some of the considerations we believe are appropriate. I guess I would say that if a school is an F school, I have a lot of confidence in our metrics that should give those schools whatever tools they need to improve, and be they charter schools, voucher schools, or traditional publics.
It will challenge, I believe there'll be some very resourceful responses, but if you have a school of 300 grade schoolers, 40 kids come in from the voucher program, and predominantly low achieving, that'd be one motivation to move schools. Your child's not doing well in A, so you move them to B. Now I'm principal of B, and I get a student who maybe is 3rd grade and can't read very well, and I'm saying I'm going to take responsibility for this. In 1 year, I can't change this all around. So there'll be a problem. I think we just acknowledge it. But there'll also be some innovative responses to that. And because you get to measure growth on the student, you might be able to do some remarkable progress. That's the whole idea behind this, that we would, ingenuity and resourcefulness and some of the ideas on this little as I call it, the holy trinity of school improvement, will have to go into play. But, I mean, yeah, it'll tax people. If a kid moves to a charter and they've had 3 or 4 or 5 years of bad instruction, now they're yours, get to work. I mean, it's going to be hard.
I want to be clear, I'm glad you're going to be there, and I think you're always a very thoughtful student of these issues and very conscientious in your concerns, so I hope I didn't seem to be kind of jumping on you on this one. I do really strongly agree with Tony that there has to be a consistent assessment, and I think your concern is a concern we talked about a number of times as these rules were in development. There are going to be whether Tony's right, I mean, we saw the numbers, and however the grading comes out, there are going to be some schools that'll get some tough grades for what, because they're dealing with tough populations, and I think to Dan's point, they'll figure out ways to explain that, and they'll have opportunity. The other thing is that those are the kids with whom you can achieve a lot of growth quickly if you apply the right kind of methods, and or at least potentially so. And so there could really be some significant improvements in growth in a very short period of time. But however you grade them, or whether you call them, whether you give them a letter grade or a number grade or you give them a name grade, you're going to have those issues.
Right. I just wanted to state that I had that concern.
Sure. I appreciate it.
Can we stream the A to F public hearing? I can't make it, but I really want to see it.
I wouldn't know why not.
Check.
Yeah.
Do folks sign up in advance for that, or whoever shows up, shows up? Is that the deal?
Whoever shows up, shows up. Tony, I'll check on that and let you know how that,
Okay.
Thanks. It's a great suggestion. I appreciate that.
okay.
Anything else? Move to the consent agenda.
We have 3 items on the consent agenda. Approval of 2 governing body plan changes for South Knox and Frontier. Both of those governing bodies passed resolutions to bring their governing body plans in compliance with House Enrolled Act 1074, which says board members now have to be elected at the general election and take office after the first of the year. So they have, by resolution, changed their plans to conform to that.
There are probably 100 school corporations out there that have this. Do we want all these coming to the board? Is that necessary?
If they're doing it, it has to come to the board so that you can approve it.
Yeah, it's by statute.
If they're doing it, if they make a change in the governing body selection plan, it has to be approved by the state board.
So that all has to come to the board. Just know that, we have done that locally and changed our policies, et cetera, but that has to be submitted here.
If it's formal action by yes.
After reading the 2 we had here, it'd be nice just to, if we get a bunch of these in, we'll just do a summary. It's been reviewed, everything's in order.
Sure.
Because I think, just an example
lot of
is, first of all, a lot around us, there are a lot of school boards that had spring elections, and we're all moving them to the fall because of the law. But you're saying that has to be set here.
Well, quite honestly, Mike, there are 2 trains of thought. One attorney, as David will say, good attorneys can disagree. One attorney will say, by operation of law, you don't have any choice, and so it doesn't matter whether the state board approves it, because the law says you must do this. It's legal counsel in DOE has said, if your governing body takes formal action to adopt this, then the state board must approve it.
Why don't you have Matt collect, either send a memo out to everybody, all the superintendents, saying, if you're doing this, send it in, and we'd appreciate it if you get them all in by
And we'll do it all
February
at
20th,
once,
and then
absolutely.
Matt can just certify
I was
that.
surprised we only had 2, actually.
And I think, and I tell you where the best place to get that information out is, of course, is through ISBA. I don't see, Julie's not here, I don't see Julie today, but, if Julie can direct, ISBA would be the best one to direct school corporations what to do.
That's a better idea than having Matt send it out, but when Matt gets whatever it gets, bring it to us once.
Absolutely.
And I'd be comfortable if he just certified.
Okay. Absolutely. We won't take any more time than that.
With that, I'd make a motion that we approve the consent
Second.
agenda.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Was there a third thing?
There are two other things we have on the consent agenda, so if we
Oh.
could hold the,
So we'll hold the motion.
These two.
I've read them.
hold the motion on. There are two recommended decisions in state board hearings, both on the issue of legal settlement. In the first one that involved Tippecanoe School Corporation, neither the school or the parents objected, although the school corporation did file summary supplemental statements to include in the record. On the Lawrence Township decision, the school acknowledged the error of its ways. They settled, and the recommended order was to dismiss, and no objections have been filed.
I apologize.
It's all right.
I will now make a motion to approve the consent agendas.
I'll renew my second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you. We have three action items. The first is the approval of proposed educator licensing rules, and we have Marge Mast and Risa Renee. In your packet, you were provided with a copy of the actual proposed rule, as well as a very comprehensive summary document that would walk you through the proposed changes from the existing teacher licensing rules that were promulgated by the Professional Standards Board. So,
Before they go in, let me
Sure.
just say a couple words. One, I want to be, I want a good understanding that this is not starting REPA over. You know, one of the things we have been committed to is continuous improvement of this process. So we never believed that prior to when the General Assembly dissolved the Professional Standards Board, that what the Professional Standards Board did was all finished and we weren't going to revisit educator licensing. That was never the intent. So this is the next step. From my perspective, this is once again efforts to streamline, cut out red tape, improve what we currently have. And so that's the entire context that this is all being brought to you. It's no intent to start REPA over as much as it is we will continue to bring improvements to the licensing process, changes to the licensing process that, one, articulate with SEA 1 and strengthen our commitment to providing flexibility to educators, flexibility to administrators, flexibility to school boards in making sure that we have the highest quality educators in the classroom. And that's why Marge and Reese are here.
I was going to talk about the purpose, but Tony sort of trumped a lot of my bulleted points, which is fine. I will say that REPA 1, that's fine. Means we're on the same page.
Well, I would hope so.
I hope. What I call REPA 1, or REPA Original, did focus strong content preparation that is still embedded in what I'm calling REPA 2, and the flexibility on the emphasis on flexibility is also, as well as expanded a little. My division works solely on the implementation of what was SEA 1, which is now IC 2028 11.5. We're trying to make a nice, seamless embedment of licensing and what the Educator Effectiveness Division is working on, a strong collaboration between licensing and what we call EEL, Educator Effectiveness and Leadership. And the whole point of the DPS board was 515, and it would be trapped with the elimination of the board. So some of the authority and who makes rules and those pieces, as you take responsibility for this in 511, we wouldn't want to have rules that couldn't be changed as Tony started in the purpose. So that is also key to what we are looking at in REPA 2, which probably has a better name, but that's just how I've been calling it.
You have had the draft document and a comparison chart that shows what the changes are that are being proposed, how they differ from what's in REPA 1 now, and the rationale for why they're being changed. And we're not going to go through section by section or line by line, but if you have your chart that shows the change summary by article, the middle column really shows changes, additions, and deletions. And I think that would be an easy place for you to get a good idea about what's being changed and why, instead of going, diving right into the 64-page rule document. And the first article, which is Article 10, has definitions in it. We're changing some definitions. We're removing some definitions that are now obsolete or are not going to be referenced in the new proposed rule. And those are in 10.1.1. Another change is that right now we issue a 2-year license called an initial practitioner license, during which a teacher completes a 2-year induction program called IMAP. It's the Indiana Mentoring and Assessment Program. And the proposal does away with the 2-year initial practitioner license and moves to a 5-year probationary practitioner license. And so the next section there actually removes what we call residency, which is the 2-year IMAP program, removes that. The third section just brings the language into alignment with the statutory change about transition to teaching programs that was made during the legislative session last spring, and it changes the language from institutions may provide transition to teaching programs as opposed to must provide. So that allows a little flexibility for institutions.
You're talking about teaching institutions?
Yes, the higher ed institutions.
Okay. I'm going to personalize this a little bit. I have a friend who is being, the FBI makes you leave when you're 57. He's got a CPA. Mandatory retirement at 57. He's got a CPA, he's got an MBA, and he's taught 2 years at Ivy Tech. Can he get a license?
We have
Without
something
doing-
called
without
advanced
doing what?
degree, yes.
I mean-
It's not a
Take the
transition to
test.
teaching program, it's called advanced degree. And yeah,
But
He-
there's several routes.
Does this address
Institutions-
this?
no. This
another-
impact,
That already
there's
exists.
another alternative route.
That already exists.
At one time, there was a law that said you had to do the transition to teaching, and so everybody put together a program, which was fine. I understand what they were trying to accomplish. This still very much allows it, doesn't mandate it, which is probably good, because the institutions that have an enthusiasm to take a talent like that and figure a streamlined process, there's more flexibility. The way I read it, I have to go through this with my dean, but
Because of my interest in that, I did read your 63 pages. And your summary. And I still didn't find that answer.
No, but I'll tell you why. Because
Hope my
the
answer's correct.
advanced degree, your answer's fine, really.
because we're going to keep doing it. No.
The advanced degree option that would apply to the circumstances of your friend is a statutory provision. It's not in rule, it's in statute. And it was Senator Lubbers, when she was on Senate Education, promoted that and pushed it through while she was still in the legislature. So that's a statutory option, and it is available.
I don't have any idea how your mind works. Do you have any idea what number that is? Statutory.
It's in 28,
Continue to talk.
You're kind.
28, I don't know. 4 is transition to teaching, maybe?
We would expect you to
Be the-
memorize all
I'm
the
so
words.
sorry. We'll find it
Sometimes
for
I
you.
have 'em.
We will find it
Sometimes
for
I
you.
don't.
But that is a second alternative route that is available for folks, and it's enabled statutorily, rather than just in
It
rules.
is 28, 4 or 5. I'll be quite impressed.
So will I.
The one question I have is about the emergency permits. Do we have Do we have limitations to how long a person can be on an emergency permit before they push into probationary and so forth and so on?
Well, in REPA 1, the rules that are in effect right now, we have a 3-year limitation on teaching on an EP.
Okay.
However, under REPA 2, there is not a limitation because the renewal of an EP would be related to the effectiveness rating of that teacher.
Okay. That's what it read, but I wanted
If
to...
you're a successful emergency, you just, that's your exit.
You're effective or highly effective, you could
Off of
continue to
emergency
renew.
into excellence.
The next section simply removed something that was called an independent practice endorsement for school psychologists that was put into, it was required statutorily, and that section has now kind of expired, but the independent practice endorsement was placed in rules by the previous board. A school psychologist wanted the ability to do some additional things and earn the right to have private practice, not just a practice within schools with students. And so this endorsement allowed them to do some additional things and then get a private practice endorsement on their school psychology license. We don't issue school psychologist licenses anymore, and that's now under the Professional Licensing Agency, IPLA. So there really isn't a need for us to continue with the independent practice endorsement. So we're taking that out.
Article 3, which would move to Article 13 in the new version, is all about teacher preparation. And in the old version, we did not delineate well new program approval, existing program approval, and accreditation. It was kind of all melded under, I don't know what the wording was, so we've listed that. You can see a lot of it stays the same, but yet we've defined out what the responsibilities would be for those, so we think it improves, makes it more clear, as well as the standards piece. We didn't have teacher standards when we did REPA 1, and now we do have them, so they're all embedded.
Two questions. One, I'm not sure this has changed from prior, but if an existing institution of higher education wanted to create a second program, you would approve that as a program. They don't have to run it through the school of ed, for example. This looks like program-specific approval.
Correct.
I'm just,
So like you're saying, if a program that was not a teacher education program at an institution wanted to have a preparation program approved, would we look at it?
or if an institution that doesn't have a school of education wanted to create a new program, you wouldn't have to create a school to do the program.
Correct, you would not have to create a school.
The program is what the approval level is.
Correct.
And then just I'm fine with it, because otherwise we'd have a lot more to do to that spec, but if I read this right, you all get to decide who's in, we have to decide who's out.
Out.
What's the background?
Do you want us to be the outer?
No, I'm just trying to figure out if I understand completely the logic of the department and the superintendent approving programs coming in. What's the mechanism by which all of a sudden on an agenda item, Becky would bring us Shane's School of Education and you'd be asking that we kill it?
Right.
Or program of it, whatever.
I think the rationale behind that was if we were going to revoke someone's accreditation, that was a serious matter that while we would make a recommendation to the board, I think we were just looking for more voices in support of that decision.
I'm sorry, on what criteria would you recommend revocation is my question. Is that in here and I missed it? Because I confess, unlike Mike, I wasn't quite as diligent. I didn't read 63 pages all the way through.
Revocation right now is, most of the institutions go through what's called NCATE, which is the National Accreditation of Teacher Education. And so if NCATE would revoke their accreditation, then it would come to us to look at it and do we support that NCATE decision, and then we would recommend that on. We're also in the process of creating accountability system that the DOE is looking at. I project it's about 2 years out before we'll have the data points. So
you're creating authority before you, I'm not critical, I like the idea.
we'll use NCATE until we would
But you
have.
anticipate replacing them. Thank you.
When you elaborate on that for a second, you mean an accountability you mean essentially to kind of see how the graduates of that program do, and if you're getting a
Right.
large number of teachers who are rated ineffective?
We're really at the beginning, but what
Right.
the vision is to have some data points that we would be able to provide to schools of ed for program improvement, and also, I think Tony's dream would be to have A to F, right? If I'm stating your dream correctly. I'm not sure what that criteria looks
Yeah,
like
I got
yet.
you.
Again,
Yeah.
we're just at the beginning development
I think it's a great
stages,
idea.
but.
There's a general
Sooner the better.
shift from NCAPE measures inputs, how many of this you have, how many of that I have, how many. We're moving towards an outcome-based thing, so
Right.
are your charges learning and
Right.
things like
Right.
this that we care about. It'll be difficult, but that is the way to move. It'll sharpen everybody's focus, it'll make them look at their programs quite
Yeah,
nicely.
NCATE shifted, I would say 10 years ago, around 2000 probably, to outputs as well, to a unit assessment system. And we would still use a lot of those things, like they used to check like how many books you had in the library and those kinds of things. That's not the vision anymore. It's more about student data. But that, we have not had as rich of data points that we've been able to provide back to higher ed that's we're anticipating that we're going to be able to do.
These outputs, though, you're right, it has been improved, but these outputs would actually be on the ground
Yeah.
while they're doing as educators.
We're hoping.
Yeah.
You're anticipating moving to a system that actually has some piece of this be based on whether the teachers are actually having the children learn.
Correct.
That's
Right,
a very
one of the
good
pieces
summary
would be
there,
effectiveness
Counselor.
data
Pretty succinct.
from the teachers, correct.
Revolutionary.
Okay.
The next section, which is on page 6 of your chart, really starts into the types of licenses and how they're renewed. Again, we're changing the initial practitioner license to a probationary practitioner license, which would be valid for 5 years. An individual with a probationary license, once we are into the evaluation system where all schools are doing annual evaluations every year, a person on a probationary practitioner license who receives 3 out of 5 evaluations of effective or highly effective would be able to renew that license for 5 years at a professional level and receive something called a professional practitioner license. As long as the holder of the professional practitioner license continued to receive effective or highly effective evaluations 3 out of 5 years, they would continue to renew as professional practitioners. An individual who holds a probationary license who either isn't employed in a school in a classroom where they would have annual evaluations, or who doesn't have 3 out of 5 effective or highly effective evaluations would be able to continue to renew at the probationary level. For a professional practitioner license, if they have a 5-year period where they do not have 3 out of 5 years of effective or highly effective evaluations, they would drop back to a 5-year probationary license. So every 5 years, teachers could go back and forth between probationary or professional based on whether they had 3 out of 5 effective and highly effective evaluations.
Isn't it true, though, that if you're on a professional license and if you have 1 year of ineffective, you move back into the probationary?
That would be status, not necessarily your license.
That's not a licensing issue.
That's status within the corporation.
Correct.
Right.
Because if in a corporation, you have 3 out of 5 where you move into the professional area, but if you have 1 year that you're ineffective, then you automatically move into the probationary system. Where if you have 2 years of needs improvement, you move into the probationary status.
That's statute.
Yes.
That is statute.
That's statute. So that's at the local district, though.
That
So,
would be a
but
contract
but
status.
if you're a professional teacher, Dan, and you go into the tank for me for 1 year and you become ineffective, you move back into the probationary status, which changes the way that you can be dismissed.
This is again aligning to outputs rather than inputs, which it feels to be the direction we'd like to move.
The last section of this article, which is on page 8, has some effective dates in it. In order to allow for time for all schools to be doing annual evaluations, up until September 1st of 2017, educators can continue to renew their licenses as they do right now. But after September 1 of 17, then we will have sufficient data, years of evaluation data, that everyone will then begin to renew based on evaluation data, effectiveness data.
Ample transition time built in.
Right, right. The next section deals with substitute teacher permits. These are basically, we have moved the substitute permit into sections with other kinds of permits that we issue, and we remove the requirement that school districts send us a substitute teacher plan. We don't collect them anymore. That's an obsolete requirement, so we've taken that out. You're welcome.
This is back to do exactly the same stuff. Why are we sending stuff into people who aren't looking at it?
You know, if schools want to have reciprocal agreements with neighboring school corporations on the use of subs, they can do that. They don't need to file a plan with us.
No value add to it.
Okay, the next section really moves into the content areas in which we issue licenses. And I'm just going to summarize. There are some licensing areas that we are proposing to delete. There are a few that we're sort of modifying what we call them. We're modifying the grade coverage of some of the licensing areas, and those changes are noted in that center column. There are a couple of areas now that the professional licensing agency issues licenses, and that would be for your speech-language pathologists, school nurses, and school social workers. And so really our licensing is redundant because we actually ask for proof of the IPLA license before we issue ours. And so we're proposing that we don't issue those licenses anymore. As long as the person has the IPLA license, we're fine with that. On page 11, the last two sections deal with the assessments. Right now, we use Praxis assessments, which are ETS, Educational Testing Service. However, we had an RFP and we have selected a new vendor, which is Pearson Education Systems. And so over the next couple of years, we're going to be transitioning to Pearson assessments as they get those developed, and we set cut scores for those. We're proposing that all content areas be able to be added to an existing license by passing the content area assessment. Right now we have about 7 areas that you cannot add with just testing, but this proposal would allow an individual to add any new content area to their existing license by passing the content area assessment.
In the past, we didn't have tests for all areas as well, and by 9/1/13, we're projected to have tests for all areas.
The next section, which is Article 16 and starts on page 12, really describes renewal requirements for the various kinds of licenses and permits that we issue. Also talks about the process for suspending and revoking licenses, which actually is not changing from the current language. We're just moving it to the new section with the new citations.
I have a question on that. Looking at on page 13, I think it is. I'm talking about page 13 of this document.
Of the chart, sure.
The summary chart. It would be the under the new 511 reference code. It's 16-4-4, 16-4-5. I don't understand why we're doing the same thing for traditional public schools and charter schools and don't just find language to include those in both.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't really know the rationale for this since I didn't draft this section.
I would like
I
to
don't know.
propose, I would like for us, when we consider this, to collapse those into one citation so that it is clear that what we allow for one school, we allow for all schools, and we're not just kind of segregating out groups of schools. And we didn't do that, but by doing that, it looks like we're doing that. And so I would, when we approve these, I would approve with the amendment that, when we make the motion, that the charter school teacher permit and the adjunct teacher permit language be collapsed into one section so that charter schools and traditional public schools have the same flexibility to bring in adjunct professionals.
And to change the name of it.
And to change the name of it.
We'll work on that, certainly.
I agree with Tony, but just make sure that when you do it, it's an or, not. There's a couple places in here where there's a reference to that seems to be specific to the charter school. I'm looking at the actual language.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So when you just make sure that it's identical as opposed to creating a higher burden on a public, because charter schools are public school teachers.
Right. Okay. Be happy to do that. The next section, Article 17, deals with workplace specialist licenses, which are licenses that are issued based on work experience and trades and skills. These individuals teach in CTE programs. Currently, we have a Workplace Specialist 1 and a Workplace Specialist 2. The Workplace Specialist 1 is a 2-year license, and during that first 2 years, the teacher who has not been through a traditional teacher ed program participates in a beginning teacher seminar and learns pedagogy and learns assessment and grading and classroom management and a variety of things that they will help them to be better teachers as they move into their careers. We're still proposing that we have this 2-year license for beginning workplace specialists, and then they would move into the 5-year probationary and the 5-year professional level, just like the traditionally trained teachers do. So there would be a parallel type of renewal requirement for them. And the very last section is accomplished practitioner. This is equivalent to what we've called a professional license in the past, which could be earned for a 10-year period for an individual who had a graduate degree and a certain number of years of teaching experience. With the use of the evaluation data for renewal, the proposal is to remove the 10-year accomplished practitioner license so that all licenses are renewable on a 5-year cycle. And that is a summary of the changes that are in the bigger document.
I'm sorry, can I ask one question?
Yes, sure.
I just forget from the statute, is there any level of teacher beyond professional? There's probationary license, then there's a professional.
Well,
so there's no kind of...
Under past licensing rules, there was a license, it was a professional level license that was valid for life.
Right.
And individuals, those were issued under Bulletin 192 and Bulletin 400 and Bulletin 4647 for a while. We quit issuing those in 91. So those individuals that hold life licenses still hold those life licenses. We're not doing anything to impact those licenses that are already held.
What I'm getting at, though, is if somebody is consistently rated highly effective, like for 5 years out of 5 or 10 years out of 10, is there any reason to create some kind of, superior before, I don't know.
Schools and districts can do it.
They can
I
do
know
that?
The state has to.
Okay.
There's nothing in the current proposal that would do that.
There's some systems out there where they give you a designation within a building and you help mentor
Master
the
teacher,
teacher.
like a master teacher's
Yeah.
license.
There's
or
some,
I'm sorry, I didn't
Teacher,
mean
leader,
to
yeah.
go the wrong direction on that. I didn't understand what you meant.
Because it wouldn't be a license, but
it'd be within,
created
In your district.
And with the new system, pay them accordingly.
pay them
Okay, so you
accordingly.
can't-
So
okay.
we've given them the freedom. I think at the
Okay.
state level, we'd
not
probably
necessary.
not be able to add much value. It'd be better to recognize by your superintendent.
I agree with
And
you.
principal.
Okay,
Because when
that's
you get
fine.
into the compensation model, then
Right.
Yeah,
then
you
that
wanna have-
pays.
Okay.
The next step would be to set up a public hearing based on this document of proposed language and also to open an online comment period. And so I think what we need, is this right, Becky, is a motion to move it forward.
Proposed rule so that we can move forward with the process, with the amendment of change
I'll go ahead and
change.
tell you what the way I would like for it to read.
Please make a suggestion, yes.
Under-
Tell us.
511, IAC 16-4-4, make that adjunct school teacher permit. Take the section 5, first A language, A line, the section 5 B line,
Okay, wait.
and then
You'll hand it to you.
I'll hand it to you.
Okay, you got it? Okay,
And
good.
then, under number 1, the applicant teaches or is eligible to teach in an Indiana public, you can say public school or public charter school, it doesn't matter. I'm like David, I like to use public and just, that encompasses all public schools. I don't think we need to delineate, but that's the way I'd like for it to read.
And you got, and you want to kill the second.
And then kill the second one, and that covers it.
And you've got this written down for
Yeah.
me? Okay, sure.
So the motion
So
would be
moved.
to approve the proposed rule as just amended.
So
We have a motion?
David made
We have a motion, do we have a second? Motion second, any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Thank you. Mr. Pettibone, if you'll have your friend contact me.
Yes.
Get his directory.
Next, we have the summary,
The summer school
summer school.
categories. We're revisiting it from last meeting.
Right,
Zach Bowdy's here.
Zach is here.
Yeah, we have a presentation Jerry will throw up there for us with some of the data that you requested. So we see in the memo that we have for you, just a little background on that first. We made a slight adjustment from last month. As we looked at the funding and broke some of these things out I'll talk about, we saw we should have enough money to fund 1 through 3 reading and 9 through 12 courses towards graduation, all at 100% based off the last couple of years. So we did add, instead of just 9 through 12 math and ELA, we did move all other high school courses up into category 1. So that's a change that you'll see on here. So for some of the data, so first of all, just so you know, when we pulled the data, we just did an analysis for the Category 1 funding in grades 1 through 6 and 9 through 12 for the past 4 school years. We went back to 2008. The data collected were unspecific, making detailed analysis difficult to complete. So we don't collect detailed information about what schools are offering during the summer, so we can't delineate between a math course and an English course or a ag course or anything else like that at the high school level. It's just, here's all the Category 1 courses in those areas. So it's a little hard to really dig into the details about what are schools taking for math or ELA and what are they doing for other courses, which is why we thought let's just put all of them together into one course since we don't have that specific data. So what we do get expenditures for Category 1 and 2, unduplicated pupil count, and then online course expenditures. That's about all that we do collect, not at the course specific level. So in grades 1 through 6 and 9 through 12, here's the Category 1 expenditures. Again, Category 1 for grades 1 through 6 is math and language arts. Grades 9 and 12, it's all courses towards graduation. So as you see, we had about $23.5 million in 2008, which is over our $18.3 million expenditure, which is how you get that 67% reimbursement rate in 2008. In 2009, it was about $21 million, and then 2010, 2011, both times those were under the 18.3. So what we're going to do here is just look at if we were to take these numbers and apply these categories. So instead of grades 1 through 6 being math and language arts, we just change that to grades 1 through 3 reading. How would these numbers shake out? And what would we be able to reimburse in previous years using the new categorization? So in grades 1 through 6, we have this. We do collect what corps offer, if they offer language arts or math. So you'll see here, we have about the same number of corporations offering language arts summer school and math summer school. So to do this analysis, we kind of just split the cost in half and said we can estimate that about half the cost for grades 1 through 6 go to math and about half go to language arts. And so we also see here some of what Mike brought up last time of schools just offering less. So in 2008, about 230 schools or corporations offered math and language arts, and that's cut in half for last year. So schools are offering, not just fewer students, but fewer corporations are offering summer school than they did 4 years ago.
And the reason being, you heard that 4 years ago, they reimbursed you at 67%.
Yeah.
So school corporations under these budget things said, I can't take the gamble and have summer school and only get reimbursed 67%. I can't afford that.
Yeah.
And that's why summer school programs were cut. Because people weren't going to take that, they weren't going to take that gamble.
I think in 2008, the estimated cost, right, there was only about $24 million. The estimated cost in the spring was $35 million in 2008. So schools thought going into it that they were only going to get reimbursed 50%. So about $10 million in expenditures dropped off. In 2011, that number dropped to only $23 million in the expected expenditures, and it dropped down to about $12 million. So a lot of schools, we'd lost about half versus before it was only about a third dropped off.
But just know before that big crunch, schools were budgeting, saying, I'm going to spend this X number of dollars on summer school, supplementing what I was going to get from the state. But after that point, then they couldn't do that. So
there's a lot of uncertainty, even with these numbers and the estimates here, just because we're not sure what schools are going to offer, if it's going to go up or down, or if schools will be more willing to take a risk this year than they were last year or the year before. So what we did was we tried to kind of estimate, okay, if we use this category, use these categorizations in 2008 to 2011, would be able to fully fund both of these, even in 2008 when we had only a 67% reimbursement. So using about, for the grades 1 through 3, that's about half of the cost in the category 1 from those years. And then grades 9 through 12, since that doesn't change, that's the same. So what you see, that third column is the important one to look at. So if we use these categorizations in 2008 through 2011, each year we would have been under the 18.3. So what that means is, Dre, if you go to the next one. So we have about 18.3 million each year. So if we would have used this categorization in the past 4 years, we would have fully funded these two kind of key initiatives each year instead of it was about 66% we funded these in 2008, 74 in 2009, and then 100 in 2010, 2011. If we would have had this categorization in 2008 and 2009, we would have fully funded these instead of only reimbursing them at 67. It would have mean other things would have fallen off. But if these are our key priorities, so if we're going to align the funding to that, we would have been able to fully fund those priorities.
Give us the difference between including an elective class and a multidisciplinary class.
For high school?
Yeah.
Let's see, category 2, it was about...
I'm not sure what those classes are. I don't know the difference between electives and multidisciplinary classes.
I'm not sure either, just because we don't collect the course specific. We're not sure what schools are requesting for those, but they would be like probably internships, co-op experiences, those types of things in the summer. But really, it's any course that counts towards graduation. So if a student's taking a multidisciplinary course that's an elective, they can still reimburse that on the Core 40.
See, as you look at the chart the chart that you handed out to us, in 11 and 12, we counted multidisciplinary courses were in category 2.
Yeah. And that's
but now I'm hearing I can't get an explanation in the differentiation between a multidisciplinary course and